and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I invite you and encourage you to subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss any of my weekly videos. I post every Sunday and occasionally post throughout the week. Now today's projects are inspired by you guys. I got a lot of engagement with my last Dollar Tree project ideas video, so I thought I'd bring you another one. As a reminder, all of the items used for my projects are included in the description box below, so be sure to take a look at that as well. And without further ado, let's get started. For my first project, I wanted to make this awesome K-cup holder that I saw on Pinterest using 4 napkin holders and 1 paper towel holder from the Dollar Tree. I also saw it used to hold small paint bottles, so this is a great addition to your craft room organization storage. In addition, I used black zip ties to secure the napkin holders in place since I knew I was going to be painting it all with my black Behr chalk paint. Now I will admit that the first 2 zip ties were a little challenging to put on since I also had to hold the napkin holders in place. However, I recommend not tightening the first one right away and instead keep it loose and tighten it little by little until you have it aligned just right. For the top, you're gonna see that I struggled a little bit because I didn't have anything to really rest the 2 napkin holders on. So I went ahead and anchored it at the top with an extra zip tie, and then I made sure to just cut it off at the end. I decided to cut off the zip tie tails as I secured the different sections, but you can always leave it to the end. I just found it easier to secure the other ties without the tails in the way. This project was super easy, functional, and looks great. So for my next project, I started off with 4 Dollar Tree picture frames. I picked these specifically because of the beautiful detail that I knew I could highlight in the end for a pop of texture. And I kept the hardware on the backing in case it would come in handy for a future project. Next, I took my Behr chalk spray paint in the color Tin White and sprayed all of the frames with 1 coat of paint. Once the first coat dried, I went back and gave it a second coat. Next, I took my Behr white chalk paint and painted the bamboo sticks I had also found some time ago at the dollar store. Now, spray painting them would have been much easier, but the weather had different plans, so I just had to improvise. And then measured them to fill the window portion of the frame. I did this for both the vertical and horizontal measurements. And once I was done, I cut them down with my shears and began gluing them into place. But then I had like an aha moment and basically realized that if I glued the 2 sticks on top of each other, my glass wasn't going to fit back in that space. So I had to take some measurements and then just cut the sticks sort of in half and then be able to fit them by gluing them to the sides of the stick that was running vertically. Before moving on to painting the inside of my frames, I quickly removed the bendable metal pieces used to hold the glass in place because I knew they would be visible from the front. Then I moved on and painted the inside, which I had skipped the first time around. Next, I took the wooden animal snake I purchased and removed the tail and head because this was going to serve as a handle for my lantern. I used my X-Acto knife to cut the ends off and it worked perfectly. Once the weather had cleared, I went outside to paint the wood post base trim I had actually bought before at the Home Depot for just over $1 because I decided I wanted to add it to the top of my lantern. Once the paint dried, I brought it inside to glue the 2 pieces together, and then I used some Alex Fast Dry to seal the gaps. I know this piece isn't from the Dollar Tree, but it really did complement everything else so well that I just couldn't pass up the chance to use it. Then I went back to my frames and installed the glass in each one, and to secure them in place, I added a bead of hot glue along the edges of the frame and glass. Next, it was time for the fun part, and that was putting together the frames to build the framework for my lantern. It was at that time that I also noticed that I did a terrible job painting my frame, so I committed to giving it one more coat of spray paint at the end to make it look better. Of course, this also meant that I would have to protect the glass that I had already glued to the frames, so I definitely recommend doing any additional paint touch-ups before you secure the glass to your frames. This will save you time in the long run. Now be sure to pay close attention to see if you happen to catch the other oops that I made. Next, I grabbed my 2 pieces of pre-cut foam board to create the top of my lantern by gluing the 2 layers together along with the wood post base trim, then gluing it to the top of the lantern. Now, if you feel you're getting value from this video so far, please show me some love by hitting that like button below. This helps me learn what content you'd like to see and value most. If you'd like to see more videos like this, I encourage you to also subscribe and hit that notification bell to make sure you don't miss any of my weekly videos. And a huge thanks to my subscribers for continuing to support my channel and showing me love. I really appreciate you all so much. Did you happen to catch the oops? Let me know in the comment section below. I then used some wooden dowels from the Crafter Square section of the Dollar Tree to create a trim around my foam board. And once all my dowels were measured, cut, and sanded along the edges, I glued them to the sides of the foam board. Next, I took another piece of foam board and created a base for my lantern. I also added the wooden dowel trim, which I think elevated the overall look of the lantern. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comment section below. And believe it or not, my friends, it wasn't until this point that I realized I never created an opening at the top of my lantern, but I took my handy dandy X-Acto knife and cut that opening out like a champ. Then once I completed that, I took some more of that Alex Fast Dry and sealed the large gaps between the wooden dowels and the foam board to really make this lantern look more finished. I also added some to the inside of the post trim, and once it dried, I left the texture as is so that it had a little more of that rustic feel that I absolutely love so much. Then I went back outside and used the Rust-Oleum metallic all-surface paint and primer in a copper rose color to paint my handle, and I used the same color to define the texture throughout the entire lantern. Once that was dry, I added the finishing touches by applying some of the leftover adhesive cork that I had from my craft room corkboard project to the bottom of the lantern. I'll be sure to leave a link to that video below in case you missed it. Then I glued the handle to the top, and I also added some nautical rope to complete the look. Now I do want to add that while I did use a strong Gorilla Glue for this project, I don't recommend that you carry the lantern from the handle as it's more decorative. I recommend instead that you grab it from the side. So what do you guys think? For this next project, I took an 11¼ inch splatter screen from the Dollar Tree and I took it apart by separating the screen from its frame. I then cut the screen in a random shape so that I could apply it to my glass vase. I began attaching the screen to the vase with hot glue, but I noticed that the hot glue wasn't really doing a great job keeping the screen on the vase, so I opted instead to go with some E6000 glue. Because of the drying time needed, I had to glue the screen onto the vase in sections, so I used some painter's tape to keep the screen on the vase in the areas that I wasn't ready to glue down just yet. I also did some final trimming so that I was just left with the portion of the screen that I wanted on my vase. And just as a quick tip reminder, the squeegee tool is a really great little assistant for keeping round objects from rolling around on your workspace. Once the glue was dried, I decided to paint the part of the vase that was not covered with the screen using a Rust-Oleum forged hammer paint and primer in the color Antique Pewter. Then I used my bare white chalk paint to enhance the glue markings where the screen met the glass, because I also wanted it to look almost as though the vase had broken but still had an inner mesh keeping it together. This also provided a neat little observation area where I could see a portion of what I put inside my vase that I thought would add a neat little touch. What do you think? Let me know in the comment section below. I then decided to also add a little bit of the white chalk paint to the rest of the painted area to break up the gray because I felt like it looked too dark for the look I was going for. I absolutely loved the way my sprigs of lavender popped against the gray and how I could see the water level right through it. Such a brain teaser. For this next project, I began by taking apart 2 wooden crates from the crafter section of the Dollar Tree. Next, I wanted to create the drawer-like framework for a wooden tray to fit into, and I began doing this by taking the corner portions of the crate I had pulled apart and used some popsicle sticks to connect the 2 corners together. A little hack I learned for this project was using these little wooden cubes as spacers. They were the perfect size. Next, I used 2 pieces of the wood crate to cover the top portion of the popsicle sticks so that it had more of a finished look. I followed the same step twice to make the 2 sides I needed for my framework. Then I used a total of 4 wooden dowels to hold both sides of my drawer frame, 2 on the bottom and 2 for the top. Next, I took 6 pieces of the crate to create the top portion of my drawer frame. One of the things that I love about the Dollar Tree Crafter Square wood pieces is that you can easily transform them into your own functional design. These tumbling tower blocks are also really great, and I use them to build a riser that I would later put on the top portion of the drawer I built. I used a total of 15 blocks to make this riser. And before I moved on to painting all of my pieces, I used 2 popsicle sticks to cover the visible gap when looking at the front of the drawer. I also did the same for the back portion. To paint my pieces, I used, you guessed it, my white Bear chalk paint. This has seriously become one of my favorite go-to chalk paints. It dries quickly, washes off my hands nicely, and I love that you can also add tint to it at the Home Depot counter to make it any color you want, rather than settling for a color that's close to what you were looking for. Then I used some Alex Fast Dry to cover some of the gaps so my pieces looked more finished and higher end. And when that was all dry, I took a sanding sponge and sanded all of my pieces to bring out some of the natural wood color and also to round out the corners some. Since I couldn't see much of a difference against the white chalk paint, I went in with some of my Waverly chalk paint in the color Mineral to give my pieces a more rustic look. Now don't forget to hit that like button if you're getting value from this video, as this really helps me bring you the content you want to see. Next, I glued my riser to the top of my drawer, and I honestly didn't like the 2 napkin rings in the silver, so I painted them with black chalk paint and placed one on top of the drawer and one on top of the riser to create 2 tiers. I really liked the contrast between the more modern black holder and rustic wood drawer and riser. To tie the 2 looks together, I used jute twine across the inside of the 2 napkin holders. This also helped secure the 2 napkin holders in place. Then I used some adhesive cork to line the inside of my drawer. This is completely optional, but I added it because I wanted something that could help absorb sound when putting things into the drawer. To really make my drawer functional, I used a tumbling tower block as a handle so that I could easily open and close the drawer. I also painted it in black to mimic a 3rd tier and really bring that black color into the wood piece as well. After looking at my piece again, I just wasn't sold on the placement of the jute twine, so I went ahead and added more to the interior part of the napkin holder. In the end, I definitely think this elevated the overall look of the piece. I'm curious to know, would you have done the same thing? I also added 2 pieces of a popsicle stick at the end of the drawer track so that the drawer wouldn't sink in too far when closing it. This would serve as a perfect mail sorter and would even have a place to store a pen, stamps, or even a small notepad.
If you didn't have an opportunity to see the last Dollar Tree video that I made, be sure to check it out. I've included the link above. And if you do give any of these projects a try, I'd love to see how they turn out, so don't forget to tag me in my social media as well. And lastly, thank you again to all my subscribers. I appreciate you so much. You are all so incredible. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And until next time, bye.